A member of the full committee has also asked to ask questions, and without objection, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Wonderful. To the co-chairs of this committee, I really do appreciate the opportunity to be allowed to join you all. And to the testifiers, thank you so much for taking the time to have a really critical conversation on the ideology known as white nationalism. The goal of these terrorists in this particular ideology is articulated after each attack, and it's one that is consistent as it is unhinged to create a white ethno-state that excludes religion, ethnic, and racial minorities. Far-right terrorists were linked to every single extremist-related murder in 2018, the most in any year since 1995, according to the Anti-Defamation League. The Southern Poverty Law Center reports 50% increase in white nationalist groups from 2017 to 2018. I will not speculate why that has happened. And according to SPLC, 81 people were killed by those influenced by the alt-right since 2014. So I will repeat something I've said before. It is a statement of fact. White men, driven by hateful ideology of white nationalism, are committing the overwhelming majority of extremist attacks in this country. And we are not doing enough to confront it. This is not an indictment of all white men. Just like the despicable acts of few Al-Qaeda terrorists is not an indictment of all Muslims. It is rather a call for action. If we're going to take it serious, the threat of terrorism, we must truly do everything we can to minimize that threat. So I apologize if I missay your name, Mr. Picciolini.
Very good.
Okay. I wanted to ask you something that was written in your testimony. You said adequate terrorism laws already exist to thwart and prosecute terrorists, as we do plenty of capable and talented people who are ready to defend us from that threat of harm. But the current counterterrorism mandate doesn't provide for proper focus, resources, and funding, or in some cases, the correct holistic approach to effectively counter terrorism. I worry about that too a lot. Of course, I agree that white nationalism should be considered a terrorism, but I'm concerned about repeating some of the policy mistakes we've made in the so-called global war on terror since 9/11. I've been working to get more transparency on the terrorist screening database. For example, I don't see a solution to white nationalism that is simply to just add more people onto that list. We've gone down the wrong road, and if we start talking about taking Klansmen to Guantanamo, what are we really saying? I believe in restorative justice. Some have faulted me for, talking about ways that we should figure out how to rehabilitate people, and how that is actually one of the strongest counterterrorism acts that we could deploy. So I believe it's a moral thing, but I also feel like, again, it is one of the best ways to fight terrorism and extremism. And so I would love for you to sort of walk us through what are some of the holistic approaches we should take, and could that be something that could be deployed even abroad as we fight counterterrorism as well?
Yeah, thank you. That's an important question. And I would say as far as the holistic approach is more towards prevention. So, making sure that young people feel like they have agency, like they are amplified through their passions, so that they're not alienated in youth. Because what I've found is that people aren't born Nazis or racist, they learn it. And they can also unlearn it as well. But it takes repairing the foundation underneath them and building human resilience to do that. But in terms of the more holistic approach, it really is about prevention and inoculating the population. We can't just focus on the national security side if we're not ever going to turn the flow of the tap off to create more of these extremists. So I think that we have to have more inclusive programs in school. We have to start teaching our history the right way. Not only about 1619, but also that we're teaching the Civil War different in different parts of the country, where in some places it's about northern aggression and in some places it's about slavery. We don't even have that sort of consistency. So in terms of a holistic approach, it really is about looking at our policies and our institutional, in many cases, racism, to try and make sure that we are creating an equitable foundation for young people moving forward.
A new chapter in the growing feud pitting two members of the so-called Squad, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, against Israel. They're planning to speak 90 minutes from now about their recent trouble with Israel, but they're also likely to get asked about a very controversial cartoon that they shared on social media. Ben Shapiro is editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire, a syndicated columnist and host of the Ben Shapiro Show, which is crowd favorite. Everyone loves it. Ben, we want to put up this cartoon and could you explain to people how offensive it is?
So the cartoon is not merely offensive because it basically paints Benjamin Netanyahu's arms silencing Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar as the Israeli flag and invokes, obviously, the idea that Israel is trying to silence these Muslim congresswomen. But it turns out that the person who created this cartoon came in second in the 2006 Iran Holocaust denial contest. There's actually a cartoon contest in Iran for this sort of thing. So imagine that somebody on the right had tweeted out a cartoon by a virulent racist and had done so knowing what that person was. There would be appropriate blowback. You're getting none of that from the mainstream media today. But again, none of this is surprising. Omar and Tlaib were going on a tour that was run by a group that has significant terror ties, that has put up on its own website the blood libel about Jews using Christian blood for Passover matzah, that has posted articles from open neo-Nazi sources. And yet the media haven't covered that either. And when the media are in search of a narrative about victimized Congress people at the hands of the nefarious Jewish state, they're willing to overlook all evidence to the contrary.
What do you think that they'll try to say this afternoon when they have their press conference in just a couple of hours?
I mean, the same stuff they've been saying before. They're going to say that Israel is an inherently discriminatory state, that boycott, divest, and sanctions, which is an idea so anti-Semitic that Nancy Pelosi called it that 2 months ago while she was speaking to AIPAC, that idea is actually a good idea and that the state of Israel ought to be denied foreign aid based on the fact that they won't allow in a couple of anti-Semites to come and talk about why Israel should be overthrown, which is the basis of the BDS movement.
Thank you. The gentlelady from Minnesota, Ms. Omar.
Thank you, Chairman. Madam Secretary, countless news sources have reported on the conflict of interests that run rampant through your top aides, especially those advising you on higher ed and loan servicing. When responding to questions about these conflicts, you have failed to adequately convince Congress and the American people that these conflicts do not interfere with the billions of taxpayer dollars flowing from education to corporate interests. Today, I would like to better understand your decisions for selecting aides and ensuring that their conflicts do not harm taxpayers. Last May, 4 of my colleagues on this committee sent your General Counsel a request for information about conflict of interest surrounding your $2 billion next-gen loan servicing solicitation. Given that this solicitation is given, I would like some information about the team that's leading it. Does Dr. A. Wade Johnson, is he the one that's spearheading this solicitation?
Dr. Johnson is head of the Next Gen Initiative.
All right. According to New York Times investigation, Dr. Johnson was the founder and chief executive of a private student loan company, Reunion Student Loan Financing Corporation, before assuming his official role with the department. Is that correct?
That probably is correct.
Yes, it is.
Let me just interject. And
I would like to continue.
and I would like to make clear that
we'll
all
give
of
you
the
some time.
individuals,
I
all the
will
individuals.
get to it. Thank you so much. Dr. Johnson was also the executive at the two financial services companies, First Data Corporation and TSYS. Additionally, Dr. Johnson was hired at least one other TSYS veteran, Mr. Patrick Fox. Have any of Dr. Johnson's previous employers bid on elements of next-gen solicitation?
Congresswoman, all of my staff, all of my team at the Department of Education and Federal Student Aid has gone through their ethics process, has taken and takes their ethics obligations very seriously. We don't have conflicts, and we will not be conflicted. We have continued to have a robust screening process, and can stand and be very resolute about that.
So given that there is about $2 billion per year in taxpayer dollars flowing through this program, will you commit to releasing communication between the procurement team and any of Dr. Johnson's former employees?
So all of the procurement is walled off from the rest.
That would just be yes or no. Would you be committed to releasing any communication between Dr. Johnson and his employees?
Not to releasing internal communication, but the procurement team is walled off from the rest of the team, and the procurement process is very definitely prescribed as to how it has to happen.
That has not clearly answered my question. The federal acquisition regulations have a section on conflict of interest. It states, the general rule is to avoid strictly any conflict of interest or even the appearance of conflict of interest in government contract relations. While many federal laws and regulations place restrictions on actions of government personnel, their official conduct must, in addition, be such that they would not have no reluctance to make a full public disclosure of their actions. You seem to have reluctance to make a full public disclosure of the actions of the head of the department's largest single procurement team, despite there being obvious appearance of conflict of interest. How is your denial to release communication in line with extremely high conflict of interest standards that's required by federal law?
The individual you have referred to is not part of the acquisition or procurement team.